Hello, everybody. My name is Sélim Niederhoffer. I'm a copywriter and a copywriting coach. Welcome to Les Mots Magiques, the YouTube channel for copywriting. Today is a special episode because I am very pleased, very honored to welcome Mr. Andrew Crofts. Hello, Andrew.
Hi, Sélim.
How are you?
I'm very well indeed, thank you.
I'm so happy to welcome you for this special episode because Andrew, you know him, you know his job, you know his title. He's the king of ghosts. That's the Independent named him this way, the king of modern ghosts, meaning that if you are willing to learn the art and craft and business of ghostwriting, is the one to teach you that. Okay, you can read his book here. It's called Ghostwriting, or you can read his other book. I started with this one called Confessions of a Ghostwriter, and this is why I decided to interview him, because he knows so much stuff. He's lived so many adventures through ghostwriting and writing his own books that I wanted to discuss it with him. Andrew, thank you so much for being with us. So I will have to start by I would say maybe the most famous thing about you. You inspired a book, and then this book was made into a movie. I'm talking about The Ghost, which became The Ghostwriter by Roman Polanski.
Yes.
How did it happen? How Mr. Harris contacted you and stuff? Can you tell us more about this?
Well, I think Mr. Harris, he knew a lot about writing thrillers, and I think he didn't know anything about ghostwriting. And so when he decided on this plot, which was sort of based on Tony Blair and the Iraq War and so on, although he denies that for legal reasons. The book that you just alluded to, the ghostwriting, he got a hold of a copy of that book and read it to give himself background on a ghost's life, and formed the character from that. And then he asked me, he contacted me and asked if it would be all right if he quoted the book at the beginning of each chapter, which I was very happy to do, because anything that improves the visibility of ghostwriters and the credibility is good. And he's an excellent writer, and he produced a fantastic book that completely encapsulates how the process works of ghostwriting with a controversial political figure. And then to be played by Ewan McGregor was very nice indeed.
Yeah.
With Pierce Brosnan playing the man who isn't Tony Blair.
Of course, not Tony Blair. We didn't say it was. So the other thing for our English watchers right now is that you've ghostwritten the biography of a popular Big Brother winner. His name is Pete Bennett. Can you talk about this this meeting?
Yes,
How
Pete
did you
Bennett
meet?
it was one of the earlier Big Brother episodes. And Pete, what made Pete very famous very quickly was that he had Tourette's, which meant he was very colourful in his language and behaviour, and he was also very, very attractive. He looks like a rock star. He's very beautiful. And very funny, and the whole country fell in love with him. And he also fell in love with a girl during the program, or she fell in love with him more so, and she was also a controversial figure. So by the time he won that series, and by the time he came out, he was the centre of a media storm, and every magazine wanted to interview him, and every girl in the world wanted to meet him, and they were flocking around like he was a pop star. So the publishers that I had been doing quite a lot of books with said, if they had a hotel suite somewhere and locked Pete and me in the room and put security outside, would we do a book very, very fast while he was still super famous?
Of course.
But having Tourette's makes things very difficult, because there was a lot he couldn't remember. Or couldn't articulate. So what the publishers did then is they brought his mother in. So it was then Pete, me, and his mother in the hotel suite, and she would sort of jog his memory and guide him, and he would agree or not agree.
Okay.
And it was a fun project. I was mainly interested. I mean, Big Brother is interesting. To win Big Brother is interesting, but I was more interested in learning about Tourette's because he was a very talented and eloquent young man who'd had his life suddenly ruined by developing this affliction during his teens, and I was really very interested in how that had felt and what it had meant to him.
That is very, very sad. I mean, to get Tourette right now, I wouldn't like it during an interview like that. Question: How long were you locked in the room?
Not very long, because if the person is trapped and can't get away, and you have the tape recorder with you, if you can keep talking for 2 or 3 days, you can get enough material certainly for the main draft of the book. I always like with my or clients or authors or whatever we like to call them to do it that way if possible, because if you do lots of different single meetings of an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, you have to start again each time. You have to remind yourself where you were. You have to warm them up again. Whereas if you ask them to take 2 or 3 days out of their calendar, go somewhere neutral where they're very comfortable, or do it in their own homes, you can get a book out of them very fast by
one take
through the story.
One take should be better. I can understand that. So can you tell us, for those who are not sure, what is ghostwriting? What would be your definition right now? You've done it for many years. What would be your definition of ghostwriting?
A ghostwriter will produce the book that the client would write for themselves if they could. So if you wanted to write your life story or some episode in your life, or even if you wanted to write a novel and you'd had a brilliant idea for it, but you just hadn't got the time or the ability or the patience or whatever to do it yourself, if you bring a ghostwriter in, the ghostwriter will download and listen to everything you have to say, read whatever you have to give them, and will then go away and try to produce the book that you would have done if you could have done it yourself.
Got it.
And then maybe help you find a publisher.
This is something that you can do, because you know all the publishers.
Just because you know more, you have more connections in publishing than somebody who has is a footballer or a television star or a politician or whatever.
Or a dictator. I've read.
Or a dictator, yeah.
You seem to be very, very fond of them in your books, in Confessions of a Ghostwriter.
Yeah, the whole reason for becoming a writer was to have interesting experiences. And having been born in the middle of society, very comfortable, neither rich nor poor, just, nothing exciting particularly. I wanted to experience life at the very top and the very bottom. So as well as people who'd been sold as child brides or bonded laborers or trafficked or abused in some way, I also wanted to talk to the billionaires and the dictators and the people at the top of the pile to try to understand the whole structure of life, and also for amusement. It's much more.
The food is better.
The food is much better, yes, and the drivers are there waiting to take you everywhere, and the whole thing is and also you get to go to wonderful locations. You can go to African countries and see sides that you might not see if you were just a tourist, and have an inside view of aspects of society.
That's like
otherwise be closed.
That's like being a journalist. You started being a journalist. You wrote some management stuff, articles in the beginning.
I did all sorts of journalism. I did travel writing, and I did women's magazines, business magazines. I did anything. I was surviving as a freelance, so I was doing anything. The thing about journalism is that you only get an hour or two of somebody's time at the most to get, and if there's somebody famous, they're going to be very guarded and suspicious, because journalists often let them down and say something terrible. You have no time to form any, and also they have no control over what you write, so they're very wary of what they say, so they never really open up. And just as you're getting interested in the subject, the interview is over and you have to write your 500 words or your 1,000 words, and then it's all. I mean, it's nice that it's out the next day or the next week or the next month, whereas with books you have to wait much longer. But you've got a chance to really ask people seriously what their lives are like and really dig in. So in many ways, it's sort of similar to journalism in that you're looking for stories and telling stories. You want to hear stories and you want to tell stories, but you can do it in much more depth.
Yeah, there's you were talking about asking questions. There's a quote in your book where you say, let me take my cheat sheet. I loved the part where you say, one of the skills necessary for ghostwriting is the ability to ask very personal questions without causing people to clam up with embarrassment. Exactly how far, I wondered, could I go with my questions this time? How much detail would they be willing to go into? Do you remember the context?
I don't remember the context. I remember writing that, and I still agree with it. I don't remember that specific. I mean, in a social situation, my wife tells me that I ask way too many questions of people,
Yeah.
and that they would, something. But I don't care, because I'm interested. I want to know how much do they earn and what happened when they lost their money and why did their wife divorce them and why did they murder somebody or sleep with somebody or whatever they did. I want to understand their thinking. And if they don't want to answer, they don't have to. They can always tell me to mind my own business or ask me a question instead, which most people don't do, I've noticed. I've forgotten what the question was. Oh yes, how far can I push it? So I will keep asking. I'll keep asking basically for as long as I want to know the answers. The same as a reader would. The reader wants to know, why did you think it was all right to murder that person or do whatever? If you don't ask, you won't be told. And people, if you do ask an outright question, most people are taken by surprise and will answer before they've thought about it. And then you start to get to some really interesting stuff. Then they won't guard themselves. And if you're asking as a ghostwriter professionally, they sort of feel that they have to answer, because that's the whole point of having hired me, or the publisher having hired me. So they know that they're safe in that.
Yeah.
If they don't want the material in the book later, they can always take it back out again. So keep asking the questions.
So a question: what kind of advice would you give to somebody starting today? How could they make a name for themselves? How should they start?
Well, you just have to make contact with as many people as possible. I mean, I don't think advertising now would work. I mean, there are lots of people up on the internet who have. I mean, you need a website or something for people to go to see. You do have to approach people specifically to say, can I ghost for you? Although the chances of that working, I think, make yourself known to every publisher and every agent, because the trick in any sort of freelancing is to have your pitch arriving on their desk at the moment when they happen to need your services. So if you send out 100 pitches in a week and one of those works, that's been worthwhile. There is no other way, really. And to do things on spec, and to write things speculatively and send them in, suggest ideas to editors. Start with journalism. You probably can't go straight to book publishing. You've got to, or start with writing websites, or something just to learn your craft, and B, to show people that you can write.
Being able to show your work.
There just isn't a shortcut. One of the advantages that I had was I started very young. I started as soon as I left school, and had no great need for financial stability or anything. If somebody's starting in, when they've got a mortgage or they're married or they've got children, it's a whole different ballgame.
That's a bit more complicated. Okay, so contact publishers, editors, agents. I had another question specifically for you. how did you choose your project? Because you wrote books, you wrote novels for you, you wrote for people, authors, celebrities, and stuff. When do you say no? Why do you say no, and why do you say yes? What attracts you to a project?
Well, the first thing is, do I want to find out more about the person? When the person approaches and either rings, well, in the old days rang, but now usually emails. When they email, do I want to find out more? And if I don't, then I will politely say I don't think there is a book in this, or I'm not the right ghost, or whatever reason. Because if I'm not interested, I will never be able to make a reader interested. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, once you've made contact and you're sure there is enough to make a whole book, you can get 60 to 80,000 words of story. You then have to check that they have realistic expectations.
Okay.
Everybody thinks they've got a bestseller because some friend has listened to them and said, oh, you know, your story is better than any thriller I've ever read or something. But that doesn't mean it is. And also, even if it is, publishing is so competitive and there are so many books trying to get the reader's attention. They need to understand that the chances are it won't be a bestseller. And if they're willing to take that chance, there's got to be another reason why they want to write the book. They want to write it because they want to set the record straight, or it'll be something that will promote their business, or they just want to do it because they just want to do it and they don't care whether 1 million people read it or no people read it, or they're doing it for their mother or their lover, but there's got to be a second reason for doing the book if it doesn't become a bestseller, because the chances are you're better off buying a lottery ticket than having a ghostwriter if you just want to make money. And then the third one is, and then after that, it's just, can I make it work for them? Do I think that I will either find a publisher if that's what they want? Will I be able to do that with them and help them, or will I be able to? Can they afford to pay to have the book written without the expectation that it'll earn the money back? I don't want to anyone to be under the illusion and to spend their life savings hiring a ghostwriter for a project that isn't going to work. So once all those things fall into place, and they generally, it's usually obvious right from the beginning that somebody completely understands the business, they know what they're buying, and they're realistic and they have a really strong story. So you can usually tell quite quickly.
Yeah, if you're interested or not. And something else that I've remembered from your book, in Confessions of a Ghostwriter, you say you can write up to 3 or 4 books a year. Did you already do that for real? I mean, did you have times of
I don't do it now because I'm tired, but yes, at the peak I did, because because what takes time when you're writing a book, what takes time is the researching and the thinking, and the selling
and the promotion,
and the promotion and all the rest of it. The actual writing, once you've got the story formed, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, once it's formed in your head, to sit down and write it takes as long as it takes to type it and then to edit it. So 3 or 4 months can be perfectly reasonable. And when I say I was doing 3 or 4 books a year, they would have been all at different stages. One of them I would have been doing proposals, going to publishers. One of them I would have been writing the actual book. One of them I would have been editing it, and another one I would have been negotiating. They'd all be just coming like aeroplanes coming into an airport. You'd have one after another, because as a freelancer, you never want to have a gap. You don't want to finish a project and then go looking for a new project, because you'll starve in between. So you always want to have projects lined up in the months ahead. But at the very peak, yes, I could do 3 months. If it's all clear in your head, the whole book is clear in your head, 3 months is a comfortable amount of time. 6 months is much nicer, but you can do it.
But you can do it in 3 months. Okay, so that's the new challenge for every ghostwriter right now. They thought that they were good with 6 months. No, now it's 3 months.
And they might be okay if their outgoings are not too high. They don't need too much money. They can probably do it.
Just perfect. You've written for others, you've written for yourself as well. What would you say is your best memory, best project, the one you loved writing about, the one, yeah, the best memory?
Well, I always loved the book I'm working on at that moment. But when I look back over them, the one that really got me started and was a big hit in France, actually, was a
Of
book in
course,
the early
sold,
years.
vendu.
Oh, yes, Fondu.
My
Yes.
mom had it, for real. My mom had it because there was a trend at that time. I don't know what's the actual name. It was Jamais sans ma fille and sold.
Not Without My Daughter.
Yeah, exactly,
Yes, with Betty Mahmoudi.
exactly.
She introduced the book into France,
Yeah, this is
and it was
it.
an enormous bestseller. Huge, 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 huge. And that was like 25 years ago or 30 years ago. We wrote it, Zaina and I, and I still get emails from people saying it's their favorite book of all time, and because it did have my name on the cover, so people can track me down, and asking what happened to Zaina and Nadia
Yeah, of
afterwards.
course.
So that's very satisfying. Zaina and I got on very, very well. We're still in touch. We never had a crossword. We sold to about 20 different countries, translation, and it was a bestseller in about 10 countries, I think. And that sort of set the trend for future books, because a lot of people read that and sent in came to me with their own stories. Because they liked the way Sold had gone. So it gave me a lot of follow-on stories after that. And it was just a very satisfying book to write. The story was so complete.
Yeah.
After Zaina had told me the story, I didn't even initially, for the first draft, I didn't even go back to the recordings. I was able to remember and write
Because
the
it
story.
made sense.
Because the whole thing just made sense and her voice was so strong. And then I went back to the recordings to check the facts and to make sure that I hadn't forgotten anything, because you always miss something
Yeah.
out. When if you have 20 hours of recording, you're not going to remember it all. And that was some projects they just go on oiled wheels, everything just smooth, and that was one of them. But I did one recently for a doctor down in South Africa called Emmanuel Taban, called The Boy Who Never Gave Up. And he was a refugee from Sudan who walked out of Sudan as a boy with no education, no money, no clothes, nothing, just walked. And he walked for 18 months and was imprisoned along the way, and then ended up in South Africa. The missionaries found him and they educated him, and now he's this incredibly successful pulmonologist, lung doctor down in Africa. And that's been very satisfying, because after the book came out, he was voted African Person of the Year by a newspaper and most influential African by another newspaper. When you get that because that was exactly what he wanted. With both Zaina and Emmanuel, they both had a reason to write the book. Emmanuel wanted to spread the word about refugees and about education and what can be achieved in Africa if people do
And
it.
hope, yeah.
And he got hope and inspiring young people, and he got that, and Zaina wanted to get her sister Nadia out of the Yemen, and eventually that worked as well. It drew worldwide publicity to her cause. So that it's always very satisfying when that happens.
And so what is the opposite when it doesn't work? You don't have to give the name of the project or stuff, but
no, well, there isn't
what
any
was wrong?
project, but any freelancer in the creative industries will tell you that it's mostly disappointment. Mostly there are projects that look like they're going to be fantastic and then they just peter out and never happen. Books that you're certain are going to be absolutely scorching bestsellers and they just aren't. There are just too many over 50 years. There have been too many. But the trick of freelancing and writing in anything, acting, writing, photography, art, is you just have to keep going, because you never know which project is going to win out. And I think even more than talent, because a lot of people are very talented and perfectly capable of being writers, artists, actors, whatever, but they don't have the staying power to keep going past rejection, constant rejection and disappointment, and trying, and then going on to the next project as optimistically and hopefully as they were before, until eventually it works. And that there is no way around that.
And we never know. We don't know the recipe for success.
You never, however experienced, nobody knows. There was a very famous book by William Goldman, Confessions of a Screenwriter, and there was the famous phrase from it was, in Hollywood, nobody knows anything.
Yeah.
And they don't. So they copy, and publishers are the same. If there's been a very successful book, when Harry Potter came out, suddenly all the publishers rushed around looking for books about magic and witchcraft and children.
Just copycats.
Yeah, and that works for a bit. You can usually sell a bit on a trend, and then it moves on, and they're left with lots of books that don't sell, and they have to find something else.
I would love to finish this interview already with a question about what you call the mid-book blues, because that's very personal. I'm right now stuck. I can't move forward. I don't want to look at my next book. How do you go past this point? How do you go back on the saddle to finish this book?
Are you talking about fiction or non-fiction?
Right now it's non-fiction, the one that I needed to end 2 months ago.
I mean, I think some people write. There's two schools in English. They call it seat of pants or planning or something, isn't it? I can't remember what it is. But some people plan a book out all the way through. Some people just start writing and hope for the best, and it'll just flow. But I think if you have the plan, if you're stuck, you need to have the planning. So you need to do a chapter breakdown, and you need to do all those things, and then you can keep going. If that isn't working, then you need to just put it aside, do something completely different, read some books on something completely different, or maybe something similar, but whatever, to get things going. It may just be the book isn't ready yet in your head to come out. It may be that it's just a rubbish book and you should give up and start something else, which is extremely hard to do if you've already put in 30 or 40,000 words. The best thing is to put it aside, I think, and say, right, I'm going to do something else and come back to this in a month's time, read it again, and see, if you read it again, it may become very obvious how to get going again, or it may become very obvious that it was a bad idea, and you need to forget it and start again. It's perfectly okay to accept that we do have bad ideas as well as good ones. In fact, most of them are going to be bad. And, sometimes you can waste a lot of time. Has this book been commissioned, this one that you're...
Yeah, of course. It was supposed to go out by October, but now it's going to be for January 2024.
Yeah.
So...
And have you just run out of things to say about...
No. I got many things to say. It's just that... I don't know. I'm bored right now.
Yeah.
I want to do something else.
I think then go away and read a completely different book. Have a quick look on what's getting very good reviews, and read that and forget about it, and then come back in 2 weeks' time or a month's time.
Yeah.
And have another look. The other alternative is you just sit down and you just beat yourself up and sit at the typewriter and don't move until you've actually, or just type out any old rubbish.
That's what's going to happen.
Come back and edit it. And that's okay. That's okay. Pour out stream of consciousness, and it'll, you can always go back and cut it out.
This is just great. Now I'm gonna finish this book, and I will send you a copy so that you can see I've taken your advice.
An inspiration to...
Of course. Last and final question: what would be for somebody who didn't like reading when they were young? What is the book that you would recommend reading? What is anything?
Yeah.
Your favorite, the best, the one you would take on an island.
on the desert island. Well, well, you see, the books that I think affect you the most are the ones you read when you're young, aren't they? I think, and they stick with you. And then I mean, there's all the classics like The Great Gatsby and Of Human Bondage, but then I went through a period of reading Sartre, and at that time, that seemed like the answer to everything. And now, if I read it, probably not so much. I just don't think there is one book, because the book has got to fit the place where you're at that moment.
Yeah.
Which is why, a book that is aimed at young adults seems ridiculous to somebody who's in their 50s or 60s. You're in a different place. You need different inspiration. You should just read as much as possible. And also don't be snobbish about reading. Read rubbish as well. I remember when I was at school, they banned Tintin.
Tintin, of course, Tintin.
They banned it because they thought it would rot our brains, because because it was, it wasn't solid text, because it had pictures. Now, of course, they would ban it because it's colonial and
they would rewrite it.
Reasons very, very, very different. It just at the time it fascinated me, and all I wanted to do was travel like Tintin and have adventures like Tintin.
Exactly, travel the world.
So I would say that Dr. Dolittle was the same, dreadful colonial stuff that you couldn't possibly do now, but amazing adventures when I was a young boy. Now I tend to like books that are about the publishing industry. There's a new one called Yellowface, which has just come out in America, which is brilliant, about modern publishing industry and social media and whether people should write if they're white, should they write in the from a black point of view, and if they're black, should they what's it called, when you steal another can't remember what the name is, but it's the
cultural appropriation, something like that.
Yes, something like that. Yellowface is very good. There's another one called The List, which has just come out, which is really good, which is about somebody getting cancelled on social media, an influencer, and how that just destroys his life, and he's about to get married and it destroys his wife's life, and that's very good. I think it's good to read new stuff, not just classics. Everyone's, you have to read Moby Dick and Bonjour Tristesse and all these classics, but some of them are just ludicrous now.
Things have changed, and when you watch movies or read books without mobile phones, without social media, you see, we've moved on. So read new things. That is great.
I think so. There's so much to think about in the modern world and the near future.
I hope that ghostwriters will still be there, even with we didn't even have time to discuss artificial intelligence and ghostwriting.
That's a big one, isn't it? Yeah.
But I guess we'll do a follow-up interview in some times, if you're okay. Andrew,
Anytime.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for all your answers. Thank you for watching this interview. If you've liked it, please comment, ask questions, send your questions to Andrew. Andrew, where can we follow you? Where can we find you? On social media, on your website?
Yeah, it's on my website, or just email me. You'll find it on the website.
Of course, it's on the screen right now. You can see.
Cool. Yeah.
And thank you again so much for your time. Take the time to read Ghostwriting by Andrew Crofts, or Confessions of a Ghostwriter, and his many books. I've on my to-do list. I really want to read What Lies Around Us.
Oh yes, and Secrets of the Italian Gardener. They have the same narrator who is a ghostwriter. So
I want to read that, and then I will call you again, to discuss the book. Thank you so much, Andrew.
It's a pleasure.
Everyone. Bye, and see you for next episode soon. Bye-bye.